Hi, Uplit followers. Today we have Jeffrey Blount here to talk about the new book that we have for his campaign, The Emancipation of Evan Walls. We're so excited to welcome Jeffrey. So thank you.
Oh, Megan, I'm so happy to be here. Glad for
We
this
are
opportunity.
we are so excited. The book has already come out, but we are so excited to support this book. I am probably more than a third of the way in, as you can see, and I am currently loving it. So I just thought I'd give the floor to you for a little bit to just talk about just the summary of the book and what our readers can expect.
The summary of this book, it's actually based on an article that I read about a young boy who was 10 years old living in city housing and who loved to read. Back in the day, we would refer to him as young, gifted, and Black. And he was a fantastic student and he paid for it often on the way home from school. And he would get beat up because it was thought to be he was doing something outside of his culture or something that made him act white in terms of wanting to be educated. And doing more research about this issue of acting white, I found other kids like him. And so Evan is a composite of many children's stories. And Evan, like the little boy, is 10 years old in 1968. He stands up one night on the porch in front of his family and friends and declares that he wants to be somebody. He wants to get an education. And at the time of integration, he says, I'll do it even if I have to go to school with white kids. And that isn't taken too kindly on the porch. And he finds himself eventually having a very difficult journey between two very different cultures in his hometown. On the one hand, he's the uppity N-word, which he would not be surprised to hear as a young Black boy in 1968, but he was shocked and just thrown by the fact that his own community found something wrong with him trying to become educated. And so he would spend the rest of his time in his hometown and beyond trying to prove that he was Black enough to remain in his culture and a part of his community.
Yeah, that's a perfect introduction because as I've been reading it, I just it this boy has just touched my heart so much in this story. And as a parent, I feel just wanting him to succeed. Like I'm rooting for him. I'm absolutely behind Evan and this whole story. So when you've talked about this idea of acting white, how does this address the systemic racism that has kind of been the conversation right now?
Well, it actually addresses it perfectly because this acting white phenomenon is a subset of the greater issue of systemic racism. I wouldn't have this story to write were it not for systemic racism. And because of things that happen at the time that we meet Evan when he's 10 years old in this town and across the large parts of the South, integration was happening. A lot of mistrust between each of the races as they were trying to come together, and a lot of the struggle in that had African American people struggling within themselves. And part of the thing about overt racism, systemic racism, is that it seeps down and enters into the community in ways that we don't expect. We're used to fighting outward, fighting against social justice. But sometimes it seeps in and it turns us against each other, which is what happens in Evan Walls. But many of the things that we see happening in the community today, trouble with police officers, this happens in Evan's book. Race in terms of how the media covers people and their desires to be heard happens in Evan Walls. So many different parts of what we deal with today are in that book and were present in the 60s and have moved forward with us. And I think Evan's story offers us an opportunity to see those things, to see what it can do to an innocent child who has pure desires, kind of makes us stop and say, well, wait a minute, because when children are hurt, we really stand up and pay attention, which is why I wanted Evan to be a child in this story. So the systemic racism is throughout the book, and how it manifests itself in Evan's life is a part of that. And I hope that by the time people are finished, they find the story meaningful enough that it draws them to both of those parallels.
Perfect. I am so excited for everyone to meet Evan. I think this is a book that would be fantastic to discuss in a book club. I think there's so many different conversations that can be had, and I agree. I think seeing it from a child's perspective really kind of shifts your focus now into adulthood of how these minds are molded and how they have this, beautiful innocence of the world. I can do anything,
Right.
and how as adults we kind of can poison that. And maybe not on purpose, but we can unfortunately kind of damper those cute, those hopes and dreams that these children have.
Yeah.
Um,
And when we're
anything
talking
else
about,
you yeah.
well, when we talk about systemic racism, you touched on a great point. That some of the people who are angry at him for doing that aren't even really sure why they're angry. They're afraid for him, and part of the reason they tell him not to go and do it is because they know that there's been danger in certain spaces when dealing with, with their white neighbors. So their fear is palpable too. And the other thing is that, what we find out from Evan, and I'm not going to ruin it for you because you haven't gotten to the end there yet, but we find that Evan, is a scarred individual. And one of the things I wanted to leave people with, I think it ends beautifully in the sense that his wife is his soulmate and listened and hears him and helps him bring his trauma into context within his life. But we see how people can be scarred from this and how they have to live with this. And Evan has a blessing of having people who have unconditional love for him to help him with the story. But I wanted to make a point to the readers that we do great damage when we stop our kids from dreaming whatever dream they want to dream about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, we could probably talk about this for hours and hours, and we'll get to that later on, but I'm so excited. Well, now I'm like, well, guess I need to read the rest of the book today so that I can wrap it up. But anyway, thanks so much for chatting with me, and I know that this campaign is going to be a success. So thank you everyone for listening.